almost to where it became a white and blue streak that the eyes had trouble following. The Zubat and Golbat launched a combination of attacks like Air Cutter, Swift and Supersonic. The coughing and wheezing shot inky, toxic black gobs of poison via attacks such as Sludge and Sludge Bomb. The Ekans and Arbok likewise utilized signature moves of their species like Poison Sting and also Toxic. The few Hypno and Drowsy, meanwhile, were attempting to use psychic power via Psywave, Psybeam and other such telekinetic attacks in an attempt to bring down the legendary Cerebrally. In a general manner, all the Pokémon at the command of the many rocket grunts also used some manner of long-range attack to bring down their target. Soon, the entire airspace was filled with the bright, varying lights, sounds and shapes of multiple attacks, each one rising up like a wall to meet the rapidly descending legendary. Seeing this, Ash grew fearful and yelled, "Articuno! Look out!" In a similar manner, Misty leaned forward and sweated nervously. That's way too many attacks. No Pokémon could hope to dodge them all. However, just before the two opposing forces could meet, Articuno suddenly stopped and then pulled back. Extending its mighty and beautiful wings out on either side of its large body, the ice-type bird gave a loud, shrill but yet still majestic screech and then flapped them forward a single time. Although it only took once. With that one flap of its mighty wings, the legendary bird of Kanto caused an unreasonably powerful and massive gust of wind to form, churning into existence like the gale from a tornado. The sheer force of the windstorm was powerful enough that, even though they were not in the line of fire, Ash and his friends slid back a short distance. Their arms were even lifted up in front of their faces for protection from the violent gust that was throwing up and tossing around powdery snow, as well as shards of ice. The brunt of the invisible wall of wind made impact with the combined salvo of attacks that Team Rocket's Pokémon had unleashed at Articuno. In a display of unbelievable force, the single counter from the mighty legendary completely overcame all the synchronized attacks of the other Pokémon. Not only driving each one back but also redirecting them in full speed at their wielders. When the large number of energy and elemental attacks collided with the unintended targets, a powerful explosion rocked the small island and sent black smoke shooting up into the chilled, cavernous airspace. Wide-eyed in amazement as she uncovered her eyes, Giselle blinked widely and her voice shook. All those attacks were defeated so easily. Brock, who was sweating in total amazement, shook his head slowly. That was just one gust attack. I've never seen one so powerful before. When the smoke cloud lifted, it revealed several of the Rocket's Pokémon now laying unconscious and down for the count. The few that remained, however, were staring at the hovering Articuno in complete fear, an expression and feeling shared by their respective trainers. Even Butch and Cassidy appeared to be at a loss for words at what had just happened, and the former gave voice to it as he stepped back in growing concern. Cassidy, I think we made a big mistake. Before she could give a reply, Articuno lifted its regal head and gave another loud cry of, "R!" Just as it flexed its wings out powerfully again. As it did this, a forceful and intense burst of snow, ice and freezing cold air suddenly came into existence and exploded outward. At this, the air all around the island platform became so cold that everyone broke out into immediate and violent chills, even through their warm clothes, and a mixture of snow and ice even began forming thinly on everyone. Though, luckily, not being Articuno's target meant that Ash and his friends were mostly spared the worst of it. This was not so with the Rockets and their Pokémon, however, for they received the full brunt of it. As the seconds ticked by, the unleashed combo of snow, ice and chilling wind turned into a full-on, violent and howling blizzard. One in which was so intense and overwhelming, the host of villains became completely obscured by the wall of raging white. What is this? Misty yelled over the loud howling of the sudden snowstorm. I think. Ash called back. This is Articuno's blizzard attack. Sure enough, the snow and ice storm continued to rage, seemingly with no end in sight. However, just when the four young trainers started to feel as though the cold would become overwhelming at any second, the storm gradually began calming. It took time and even longer for the visibility to become restored, but once the small island had returned to some state of normalcy, there was a thicker covering of snow and ice on everything. What was more, to the shock of Ash and his friends, not only were all of the rocket's Pokémon now utterly defeated, but several of the grunts were even laying half-buried in mounds of snow. Butch and Cassidy, as well, were thoroughly covered. After a short time passed, the two commanders of the nefarious mission came back to their senses and shook themselves into lucidity. Quickly scrambling up out of the snow they were encased within, their bodies so cold that they had trouble moving at first, Cassidy looked at the aloft legendary and growled under her breath. Everyone! She finally yelled in a voice that trembled from the cold of the snow and ice clinging to her uniform. Our retreat, now. This operation is AFF failure. Our retreat. Immediately, all the rocket grunts hurriedly scrambled as fast as their frozen bodies could move and pulled themselves from the snow. Then, after hastily returning their frozen and unconscious Pokémon, all of them fled in terror from before the legendary that had just soundly beaten them in mere seconds. In frantic panic, all of the grunts practically threw themselves off the island and back onto their jet skis down in the water. Butch and Cassidy, meanwhile, went to follow suit, but right before reaching the edge, the latter looked back and pointed at Ash and his friends. You had better hope you never cross paths with Team Rocket ever again. This will never be forgotten. With that threat delivered, she and her male comrade jumped off the island and landed on the two jet skis that Ash and his friends had stolen. Then, with all haste and urgency, the criminal squad of rockets turned on their aquatic vehicles and quickly sped across the length of the underground lake, disappearing through the same waterfall passage from whence they came. As they watched the last of the rockets disappear out of the cavern, Ash and company were left in stunned states of stupefied awe. It's over, just like that. Misty still couldn't believe her eyes. All of those rockets were defeated, so easily. Giselle trembled, though not entirely from the cold. This is the power of a legendary Pokémon, no book or class could ever describe it adequately. Ash, for his part, could only stare up at Articuno, whom was still hovering up in the air with gentle flaps of its wings. It was staring out intently over the expanse of the vast cavern, as if daring the villainous intruders to come back into its home. When several tense moments like that had passed, the great bird slowly turned around and looked down at the only remaining humans left in the cave. Well, 4 humans plus 2 Pokémon, since Pikachu and V had finally emerged from out of Ash's backpack after hearing the jet skis speed away. As soon as they saw Articuno staring down at them, each one of the kids froze in immediate fear. Even Pikachu and V appeared trepidatious and unnerved as the sharp, piercing red eyes of the fierce legendary stared without blinking at them all. Then, in a gesture that caused the 4 young travelers to shiver in terror, Articuno slowly descended down to the ground with precise, controlled, graceful flaps of its mighty wings. When its long, sturdy legs finally met the ground for the first time, the ice-type legendary stretched up to its full, regal height and continued to stare at them. Though, in only a few seconds, the large bird began walking their way with its wings now folded into its sides. Ash and his friends remained completely still and dare not move so much as a muscle. Even when the terrifyingly powerful legendary drew near until it stopped and just stood still, a few feet away, no one moved an inch. In one of the most tense moments of their young lives, the 4 of them just looked at Articuno without speaking, or hardly even blinking. The renowned bird in question, however, looked at them with those same intense, predatory eyes. Though no visible emotion of any particular kind could be seen in those deep eyes, and that caused them all to feel even worse fear. It was only after this dragged on for some time that Ash, whom was by now tired of just standing still like a statue, waiting to be either smashed or polished, decided to do something. And so, with that decided, he spoke softly to his friends. Guys. His voice was a whisper. Articuno can't see our faces. Let's slowly take our masks off and let it see how we look. Maybe that will help it make up its mind about us. Deciding to go with their friend's suggestion, Brock and the 2 girls nodded and then slowly began reaching up to the full masks on their faces, Ash leading the way. Then, as they started to pull them up, Articuno watched them closely, not even blinking or twitching a single tail feather. Ash was the first to get his mask off, with the others following suit close behind. Once their faces became exposed, Articuno finally did blink, and when it did, the powerful Pokémon tilted its head to the side and allowed a small cooing sound, of all things, to rumble in its throat. Arrrrrr. In a move afterwards that had Giselle, Misty and Brock tensing up again, Articuno slowly walked forward once more until, to their shared worry and concern, it stopped in front of Ash, now only about a foot or so away. From the extremely close angle, the native-born trainer from Pallet Town could see every detail of the legendary Pokémon. From its beautiful, pristine white and blue feathers to the crest that rested upon its head like an icy crown. Even the long, trailing tail feathers that lay sprawled out behind it on the pure, white snow Articuno had just made were visible in detail. Ash could feel a coolness radiating from the body of the majestic bird, but it wasn't overwhelmingly freezing or overpowering. Though, to his great surprise, Articuno slowly extended its beak out to him and then stopped, only inches away from the young man now. Its eyes were staring deeply into his own and he, unable to do anything else, simply stared right back. Red meeting amber. What's about to happen? Giselle whispered to Brock, whom could only reply back in the faintest of whispers, as if afraid moving too much would draw the attention onto him. I don't know, but don't move or it could put Ash in danger. Even as he stared into the fierce and piercing red eyes of Articuno, Ash didn't move, he barely even blinked. His breath was slow and steady, and though he found the intense gaze of the powerful legendary intimidating and unnerving, to him it felt like there was some unshakable connection that was holding their gazes together. Slowly and without realizing what he was doing, Ash reached up toward Articuno with his right hand, and as he did, the white star mark pattern on his palm started to appear. While he reached out toward the legendary Pokémon, as if in a trance with his eyes now staring distantly into Articuno's own, neither one breaking the other's gaze, his friends immediately became wide-eyed in worry and shock. Ash. Misty hissed. What are you doing? Didn't your mom ever tell you to look but not touch? However, he continued to reach ever so slowly towards the blue and white feathered bird of legends. The mark on his hand glowed ever brighter still until, at last, it made contact with the cool, smooth surface of the dark-colored beak of the unmoving Pokémon. As soon as this took place, a bright light emerged from the space between where hand and beak met, and as it did, the light grew and expanded outward until it was not only shrouding Ash and Articuno, the same occurred for Brock, Misty and Giselle. As the pure, white light suffused them and seemed to spin, twist and encircle around the four young trainers and one legendary Pokémon, all was still and at a total hush. It seemed, as it were, that the very air itself had become weightless and the likeness of a cloud, so was the gentle aura of the light. When it finally started to fade and grow dim, all gradually returned to normal and soon left Ash's friends looking at each other and wondering what had happened. Ash himself, on the other hand, was still staring at Articuno as the last of the light seemed to fade from within his very own eyes. After this, he blinked and took a step back, shaking his head and then rubbing his fists over his eyes as if to clear the last of the blinding light from his still sensitive retinas. What came next, however, caused all of them to almost jump back in shock and their eyes to widen to the size of the Pokeballs they carried. For, as if from a disembodied specter, they heard a soft and feminine voice speak, seemingly into their very minds. Truly, I must thank all of you for helping to defend my home. All of them instantly began looking around for the source of the voice, but, once again, they heard it speak in the exact same manner as before. If you are looking for the speaker of the voice, I am right in front of you. Each of them looked at Articuno, whom was now staring at them passively and calmly, showing no aggression whatsoever. There was, in fact, silence that reigned for some time until Giselle pointed with a shaky finger. Did I just hear Articuno, talk? The mighty and majestic bird looked at the brunette and dipped its crowned head. Indeed you did, young one. If it is not my voice, then I assure you, it could be no other. You are not losing your mental sanity, as I am sure you must now be thinking. Misty's eyes were still like dinner plates. But, how can we hear you talk? You're a Pokémon. Shifting its attention to Misty, the bird seemed to give a soft trill of amusement before speaking without audible words again. Oh dear girl, there is far more to the mysteries of this world than you could possibly comprehend. Articuno then turned its attention to Ash, whom was just staring at the ice-type legendary in a manner that conveyed his own amazement at the situation. Soon, in a voice that seemed to grow softer and somehow gentler, the mostly unknown Pokémon addressed him. I have known you would come for some time now, young chosen one. Though I found myself anxiously in waiting for when that time would be, and how. Finally, his tongue seemed to loosen and Ash managed to gather together a reply. You knew I was coming. How? And how do you know who? That line of questioning seemed to fall away though since he quickly understood how Articuno knew about him. Sensing that he had already picked up on the rationale behind their meeting, the legendary Pokémon of the ornithological variety nodded and blinked once. Yes. Mother Arceus made all of us very aware of you long before you were born, young chosen. I have waited long to meet you. Hearing this as well, Giselle and the other two shared a look with each other, the expressions on their faces saying it all. While Ash had indeed told them who he was and of his so-called destiny, hearing it was one thing. Meeting a legendary Pokémon, one that could talk of all things, and hearing it speak to their friend of the very subject matter they had heard about, added a whole new weight to it. Even still, Articuno continued on. I had been asleep for some time and was awoken shortly before you came here. I did not know how we would meet, or when, but I had a feeling the time was at hand. I wondered if whether or not my re-emergence to the world and the subsequent humans that sighted me around this island would draw you here, and it did. A level of distaste entered into the legendary bird's telekinetic tone. I do wish that my awakening had not attracted the attention of those villainous and vile humans that have been stalking the cavernous recesses of my home. Though, if it allowed us to meet, I suppose it is of no consequence. Ash was still flabbergasted, though to a gradually lessening degree. His friends, however, appeared stunned beyond all belief even now. So, he slowly began. You said you had been asleep, why? And why did you only now awaken? Articuno blinked at him and then seemed to settle in a little more with its wings getting firmly tucked into its sides. I awoke because it was my time. You must understand, young chosen, that at different times throughout history, we legendaries have went to sleep. Not all at one time, though rarely that is the case. We recluse ourselves away from humanity and the world, usually in order to rest or to hide from humans that relentlessly seek to hunt us down and capture us or use us for our power. Giselle, whom seemed to find her voice as she came to some manner of comprehension with the present situation, asked, albeit meekly. So, when was the last time you awoke? The dignified and regal avian looked at Giselle, which made her lock up nervously again. Though, Articuno's voice remained soft and gentle. A little over 10 years ago. Shortly before young Ash was born. Some of us went to sleep at that time, but others have been sleeping for far, far longer. Others of us are awake even now but remain in hiding. Losing his nervousness and trepidation of the legendary, slowly, Ash asked in a more relaxed tone. Have you ever had any interactions with humans before? You know, good ones. The ice-type bird nodded as its disembodied voice spoke into their minds again. Indeed I have, many times in fact. As a lower legend, I have more interaction with humans than those of my brethren whom deal with worldly matters and the balance of nature. I have helped save humans lost in dangerously treacherous, snowy mountains, and in other matters, I have also assisted my fellow Pokémon. There was a small pause before Articuno continued. The last human I had personal interaction with occurred before you were born, young Ash. He was a kind and respectful man known as Noland. At that, the bird with the beautiful plumage looked up and its voice seemed to take on a fond undertone. I came across him when he was lost on a mountaintop in the middle of winter, right here in Kanto. It was many years ago now. I saved him from freezing to death and afterwards, we struck up a sort of friendship, if you will. Articuno looked back at the kids again. He was curious of me and made no attempt to try and capture me. I could sense he had a good and kind heart, and for that reason, I met him every now and again on that mountain in warmer seasons when he came back to train upon it. For he was a Pokémon trainer, you see. The legendary blinked its ruby eyes once. Even though I could not speak to him as I do to you now, he always had plenty to say to fill the silence. Which was fine for me, usually I do not entertain much in the way of company. As I am sure you understand. Misty, finally, found courage enough to ask. How are you talking to us like this anyway? It feels like some kind of telepathy. Articuno looked at her and then glanced back to Ash as it tilted its head. It is the star mark on young Ash's right palm that is allowing us to speak right now. The aura that comes from it has opened a temporary telepathic link between us. If you were not with Ash, you would be unable to understand me. Misty, Giselle and Ash blinked and then nodded in equal states of awe as they all looked at the mark upon his palm. Brock, however, raised his finger and asked. If I may ask Articuno, why did you allow Team Rocket to stay in these caves for so long if you knew that they were here? The blizzard-creating Pokémon looked Brock's way and then blinked. Rarely do I reveal myself to humans, especially ones such as those. And yes, I knew of their intentions for me. I did not feel pressed to take action against them because these caverns are vast and treacherous. I did not foresee them finding me here and they most likely would not have, had the four of you not come. Ash and his fellowship had the decency to look a little guilty but Articuno made a trilling sound in her throat again that sounded vaguely amused. No, young ones, do not feel guilty. For it was of Mother Arceus' will that you came here. Just as it was of fate's design that you bravely withstood those villainous humans and drove them away. Of which I am highly grateful for. Giselle, ever the curious one just like her boyfriend, showing why she was the top student at Pokémon Tech, tilted her head in a rather cutely confused manner. It was quite her usual motif to make just such an expression when in question about a matter. Something Ash actually found rather adorable since it reminded him of a certain white-haired beauty in one of those manga book series that he read every now and again as a child during his free time. When Giselle tilted her head due to confusion or an important question suddenly striking her, it reminded him almost perfectly of a sweet, bubbly and lovable barmaid character in that particular series. Of course, it had been many years since he read it last and he couldn't remember the title of the series or the name of the fictional girl in question. All he could remember of it was that the story followed a group of young wizards that worked for a special establishment and could use their own varied forms of what they called magic. This establishment in question was one in which hired out those very same young individuals to take jobs for it as members of that outfit. Very unique and at times dangerous jobs that usually consisted of helping the citizens of the fictional kingdom that the series itself resided in. Even though Ash couldn't recall many details about the manga in question, as such comics were called, it had been one of his favorites growing up. What with the constant slapstick comedy and, to his own hidden shame, all the sensual scenes, for some reason called fanservice, that he always took secret pleasure in reading. Not that his mother ever knew, of course. Regardless, the very same beautiful, admittedly buxom, white-haired barmaid in the unnamed manga that Giselle so reminded him of at times had always been his favorite. Thus, when his girlfriend unwittingly portrayed the fictional beauty in times such as now, it always amused him to some degree. No matter how serious the situation was, much like the present moment. Soon enough though, she gave voice to what was on her mind. Excuse me Articuno, but how exactly did Team Rocket even get down here into the lower levels of these caverns? The surface rooms are all full of freezing water right now and someone we spoke to today said that the passages that lead down to these levels were always flooded and impossible to traverse. How did they get here then? The mighty and majestic avian Pokémon looked at the smaller human and its wizened tone answered her question knowledgeably. There are many secrets to this island, young one. Secret ways and entrances even into these very caverns. Some of which are accessible only by way of underwater passages. My assumption is that they somehow located one of these passages under the turbulent waters that defend this island. For some of the waterways in this place are deep and they connect to and are fed by the sea at certain places. Articuno tilted its head down to the white plumage under its chest. Such a way would have been most impassable for yourselves, but with the strange metal machines you humans possess, especially of the wicked sort that were just here, such things are sadly not beyond their reach. She nodded in understanding, but then Giselle asked again. Are the tales then about all the other legendaries true? And if so, are there any more in Kanto? Like Zapdos and Moltres? And are they all asleep? The beautifully graceful bird looked at the brunette once more and replied in a tone belaying far more than it was willing to divulge. Unfortunately, young ones, there is much I am unable to tell you, save for this. In time, some of you here may indeed be given the answers to all that you wonder. Articuno looked at Ash then, as if silently communicating without words that he would indeed be the recipient of such knowledge if his course stayed true and right. Afterwards, she tarried on a little more. Though I can tell you that if you have believed in and seen me, indeed does the same remain true for my kin. Though I cannot speak on behalf of themselves, that is beyond my authority to do so. In this, mystery must remain in the misty pathways of your journeys, young ones. Articuno then straightened itself up a little more and began stretching its wings outward. Now, I do believe that it is time for the four of you to return to the world above. Your purpose here has been fulfilled. Misty sighed deeply at that. It's gonna be a long way back. She then put her hands on her hips and gave a soft glare at Ash. You better remember how to get us topside again, Ash. Because I definitely don't. Smiling nervously, the messy-haired boy held his hands up and chuckled. Course I do, Misty, gimme a break. Suddenly, Brock called back to them from over at the edge of the icy island, where he had walked over to and looked down into the water below. Guys. That might be kind of hard to do. His face became grim as he turned to face his friends. Team Rocket took the jet skis we used to get here. At that, Misty's eyes widened. What? You're kidding. Giselle gasped and held her hands over her mouth. That means we're stranded here. How can we get back if we can't safely travel through the water? Hunter may be too tired to get us all back to the surface. Articuno spoke then, the female-sounding voice of the legendary calm and soft. Do not be in distress, young ones, I will take you back to the surface myself. And through paths far safer than that which you used to get here. All of them looked at the legendary ice type in question as to what was said, but when Articuno lowered itself down, as if to roost, it looked back at the children and blinked its scarlet eyes. Come, climb upon my back and I shall fly you out. At the offer from a legendary Pokémon, of all things, to willingly ferry them out of the cavern, their eyes in unison widened and their expressions displayed their surprise. Although, it was Ash that gave voice to the disbelief among them. Are you serious, Articuno? You really want to fly us out of here? The legendary bird trained its sharp eyes on the young man and gave the simplest, yet most sincere reply. For you young chosen, indeed it would be my honor. More so still because you have, all of you, proven your hearts pure in your actions today. Before any of them could take the legendary up on its offer though, Ash suddenly had something jolted back to his memory. Oh, that's right. Man, I almost forgot, we can't leave yet. He then removed the pack from his shoulders and set it down, opening the top pouch just enough that Pikachu and V had room to hop out. Guys, I want you to meet Articuno properly real quick. With that, the small electric type and his recent pack companion smiled and gave chirps of agreement as they hopped out of the backpack. Afterwards, Ash stood up and placed his pack back upon his shoulders while looking at his friends. Before we go, guys, I think we need to let our Pokémon meet Articuno. Brock, Misty and Giselle all smiled in one accord with the idea and nodded before reaching for their Pokéballs. Seeing this, Articuno felt a warm burst of affection for the caring young trainer from Pallet and stood up to its full height once more. Soon, they released all of their Pokémon from the confines of their Pokéballs. Ash released Haunter, to join Pikachu and V, while Brock let out Zubat, Graveler, Onix and Vulpix. Misty, meanwhile, released Starmie, Staryu, Horsey, Seeking and Tentacool. Giselle, likewise, did the same for Marowak and her own Graveler. As soon as all of their Pokémon were materialized onto the raised, island platform that the nest resided upon, each of them, from Onix and even to Marowak, looked in awe upon the splendorous form of their legendary kin. Ash, at the helm, smiled and gestured back at all the Pokémon. Articuno, these are all of our Pokémon. Without them, we would have never stood a chance against Team Rocket. He then gestured up at Haunter, the typically stoic and unreadable ghost type's face actually showing his own form of reverence and respect for the mighty legendary in their midst. This is Haunter. He actually helped get us here most of the way by ferrying us through the caves in a psychic bubble he made. Ash then knelt down and fondly rubbed the heads of V and Pikachu while smiling. And this is V and my first ever Pokémon, Pikachu. They had to stay in my backpack because of the cold and also since I didn't want Team Rocket seeing them and tracing them back to me. But he gave a small chuckle. They're super tough little guys and really good, loyal friends. As if to prove his point, both V and Pikachu looked at Articuno with bright, mirthful eyes under the gentle hands of their trainer and chirped enthusiastically. Pikachu Pie. V. Ash smiled again and then looked at the legendary ice type a little sheepishly. I have two others with me but they kind of wouldn't fit in this cave. Giselle then stepped forward and gestured at her own Pokémon with both hands. And this is my Graveler and Marowak. They really fought hard against Team Rocket and showed how brave they are. Brock was next and pointed at his own Pokémon. This is my Onix, Zubat, Graveler. He then stooped down and picked up the small little fire-type Suzy had sent with him. And this is Vulpix. The cute little fire-type I smiled and cooed from her trainer's arms in greeting to the ice-type legendary. Bool. Vulpix picks. However, she quickly caused Brock to grunt as she kicked herself out of his arms and then padded across the compacted snow in order to sit next to Pikachu with Ash. Something in which had the squinty-eyed teen staring in confusion for a moment as she sat herself down close to the electric type and cooed softly to him. Pikachu, for his part, just looked at her and blinked for a moment, left ear tilting to the side as he somewhat confusedly returned the greeting. Pika. Brock, whom was now no longer in question as to why Vulpix had so suddenly left his arms, as well as Ash, Giselle and Misty all smiled knowingly at Vulpix's overt display of sweetness to Pikachu. In her desire to seemingly always be near him, the elegant little Vulpine was slowly making her growing interests known in Ash's powerful first Pokémon. Of course, whether the young electric type noticed it or not, like the humans of the group did, and even some of the other Pokémon, remained to be seen. Even Articuno appeared to be in genuine amusement at the display. Misty, at last, finally stepped forward and gestured to her own Pokémon. I'm training to be a water Pokémon master so all of mine are water types. This is Staryu, Starmie, Seeking, Horsey and Tentacool. After introductions were finished, Articuno looked amongst all the assembled Pokémon and cooed. It was a soft sound, low, harmonious and gentle. It was also apparently a greeting call since all of the Pokémon returned it in their own ways and even gave small bows of respect to the regal legendary. Afterwards, Articuno spoke fondly in once more telepathic speech that the humans could understand. Truly I say that by seeing these brave, strong and valorous Pokémon I call my kin, their stature speaks stoutly of your own prowesses and of the humans they call companions. Not as mere trainers but more importantly, as humans of kind and compassionate hearts whom these Pokémon love. She scanned her eyes over all of them once more. Though each of them are indeed young still, for this I can see by looking at them, they are all filled with great promise. At that, Pikachu bounded up to Articuno and smiled at the legendary as he sat on his haunches and commenced to speaking while making gestures with his paws. Pika. Pikachu Pika. Pika Pika. Pikachu Choo Choo, Pikachu Pika Pi Pikachu. In their own tongue, Common and Legendary both talked for a short while together. As they did, Ash and his friends looked on in mystery, wondering amongst themselves what was being said. Eventually, Articuno looked up again and stared at Ash. You and this Pikachu were indeed fated for one another, young chosen one. For in him I sense very great power that only with you will it be unlocked to its truest potential. Articuno then looked at Haunter and trilled softly. Mother's heart was often grieved by your fate, O stricken one. It does her heart and mine as well good to see that the pain and darkness that once festered in you is now being replaced by love and peace. Haunter had nothing to say, as usual, but merely bowed his head in acknowledgement of those words. Then, afterwards, she looked amongst everyone again and spoke once more. This meeting has been most pleasant and enjoyable, but night will soon descend in the outside world and I would have you returned to it before then. Come, let us depart. Ash and his friends agreed with the legendary's stated opine and returned their Pokémon before walking up to the avian ice type. As they approached, Articuno knelt down again and lowered its wings while speaking reassuringly as they stopped and looked at the great bird. Do not be afraid, young ones, come. I will safely return you to the world waiting above. Ash, being the first to do so, felt comforted by Articuno's words and knew he could trust the legendary. So, with no further ado, he walked up, reached out and finally made first real contact with the large bird's feathery form. As soon as his hands touched the light blue feathers that covered Articuno like a silken pelt, he marveled at the coolness that met his skin. It wasn't freezing, nor unbearable, but resembled that of a cool evening in autumn. With Pikachu and V having ran up and climbed on top of his backpack, Ash took the full plunge and mounted the patiently waiting bird. As he sat down on the soft and pleasantly cool surface of Articuno's back, near to its neck, the young man smiled and shook his head. When I was a kid I always used to dream about things like this, now I can't believe it's actually happening. Afterwards, he looked down to Giselle and smiled, holding his hand out to her. Come on Giselle, it's really not bad at all. The brunette glanced nervously at the large bird once and then back at Ash before swallowing down her fear and slowly approaching it. Once she was within reach of Articuno, she extended an arm up and grabbed onto Ash's outstretched hand, allowing him to help pull her up until she was sitting behind him. Ooh! A quick squeak of surprise left her lips when she felt the coolness of Articuno's feathers meet her lower half, even covered as it was. It's cool. It actually feels cool. In amusement, Articuno looked back and in its eyes appeared a glint of humor. I am not known as the legendary bird of ice for nothing, you know. With that, Misty climbed on behind Giselle and Brock did the same until he was seated at the very rear, nearest to Articuno's streaming tail feathers. Both former gym leaders passed through the same initial moment of awe as Ash and Giselle. Not just at the coolness emitting from Articuno's body but also the fact that they were now actually seated upon a real legendary Pokémon. After giving the 4 young trainers on its back a chance to grow accustomed to the experience, Articuno slowly rose up out of its roosting position and did so effortlessly. As though a group of humans and 2 small Pokémon were not presently mounted upon its back. This was something which gave them all the more reason to marvel at the legendary Pokémon since, while large indeed, it wasn't massive by any right. Let alone seemingly big enough to carry 4 people at one time. As it rose up to full height, Articuno fanned its magnificent wingspan out and then looked back a little at the ones it was about to ferry through the air. Ash, grab on tightly to me and as for the rest of you, hold tightly to each other. He quickly did so and grabbed the feathers at the base of Articuno's neck, though not hard enough to pull any out. Pikachu and V settled themselves down in the back of his pack and his friends grabbed onto one another in turn. Starting with Giselle wrapping her arms around his waist, Misty grabbing hers and Brock following suit in the rear. After that, they all held on tight as Articuno began flapping its mighty wings slowly. With each flap of its wings, it was as if twin gusts of cool air were blown into the surrounding airspace and puffs of powdery white snow were sent into the air like sand by a desert storm. Eventually, the Ice-type legendary Pokémon started to lift off the ground and gradually climbed higher and higher until soon, it was several feet off the ground. Seeing this, all of Ash's friends grabbed tighter still onto each other just as Articuno turned around and faced the direction that went exactly opposite of the entryway into the cavern. Starting off at a slower speed for the sake of the humans on its back, Articuno began to fly across the open airspace of the large cavern, leaving its small island nest behind and steadily increasing speed as it went. Looking down, Ash and his friends saw the clear, pure and freezing water of the cavern far below and not for the first time, their grips were reassured to maintain a definite insurance against plummeting into said icy waters. However, when Ash looked ahead, he saw Articuno rapidly heading toward the far wall and the same large waterfall on high that she had come through earlier. Hey, Articuno! He called down to the legendary they were currently astride. We won't make it through that same waterfall you came through earlier. We'll be knocked off. However, the crimson-eyed bird replied telepathically back up to him. Have faith and fear not, young one, you are not in danger. Even still, Ash grabbed tighter onto the legendary and instinctively lowered himself down while he felt his friends all doing the same behind him. Then, When they were only a few yards away from the rushing waterfall, Articuno suddenly put on a high burst of speed and practically bolted straight at the roaring falls. Closing their eyes as the spray of the falling water began meeting their faces, Ash and company could only hope for the best. But Articuno, within mere seconds of hitting the waterfall at full speed, suddenly tucked its wings up and behind it. Doing this caused Ash and the others to become protectively encased by Articuno's large wings until they were temporarily shrouded in darkness. On the outside though, the powerful legendary simply passed straight into the icy falls like a sharp javelin being tossed through the finest cotton. With grace and elegance to spare, Articuno passed through the other side and broke no stride in immediately unfurling its wings so it could flap them again. As vision was restored to them, Ash and the others looked around and saw that they were indeed now on the other side of the falls. As evidenced by looking back and seeing the opposite end of the waterfall now facing them. Looking forward again, they saw the astounding sight of a brightly lit and large tunnel now surrounding them on all sides. Articuno had passed through the waterfall and into a hidden passageway. Though not just any mere passage. The tunnel in question was not only big enough to hold Articuno's large form and greater wingspan, but it was also brightly illuminated by what appeared at least to be glowing blue ice crystals. These crystals lined every inch of the passageway, in a complete 360 from ceiling, wall to floor. What was more, the shining illumination of the ice crystals seemed to catch brightly the sheen of Articuno's glossy feathers and reflected it off the walls back to them. Their eyes beheld the glow of the icy crystals and their faces were slack in amazement. As Articuno flew on, gracefully, through the long tunnel, smoothly shifting ever so slightly in accordance with each turn, curve and rounding of the ice crystal passage, Ash asked aloud for all to hear. "Hey Articuno, what's with the ice crystals hanging everywhere?" Seamlessly following the tunnel that had been traversed by it many, many times before, Articuno replied back simply. "I have traversed the caverns beneath this island for many countless years, young one. In that which I dwell, so too it takes on the characteristics of that which I embody. I am the living personification of the harshness of a winter snowstorm, but I also reflect the beauty and fragility of ice." One eye shifted to look back at him. "These lower caverns in which I have dwelt have taken on the image and nature of my own form. You experienced the danger and treachery of a storm on your way to me, but now, you see the beauty that is in what I embody. As it is with all legendary Pokémon." Rounding a slight leftward curve that then shifted straight upwards, gradually, the legendary ice and flying type finished its brief explanation. "Some call snow and ice the bearers of cold death and bitter desolation. But it is also the representation of the beauty of a world at rest in winter, restoring itself for the spring to come. As well as the cleansing of all impurities that come when snow falls and blankets the land in pure white." Ash blinked in wonder at the saying for a moment, which was mirrored by his friends, before he settled for a smile and looked around again. "You know. I can see it." Suddenly, the passage took an even sharper course straight upwards, and as it did, Articuno called back. "Hold tight, young ones." With their grips as firmly secured as possible, the dual-type legendary began a rapid ascent straight upwards, in an almost perfectly vertical line. The light of the crystals were still shining brightly about them, but thus far, they could only either see each other's backs or Articuno's neck, in Ash's case. Finally, after flying upwards for what felt like forever and having been traversing the crystal-lined cave passage for even longer, Ash looked up and saw the end of their voyage rapidly approaching in what looked like a cave opening dead ahead. Seeing the unmistakable sight of fading daylight directly above, he grasped even tighter onto the bird beneath him, and then, within seconds, Articuno broke the plane. With a screech of emergence, the legendary Pokémon of old shot forth into the outside world and continued to ascend straight into the air. After climbing into the now free, open sky for a short few seconds, Articuno righted itself and leveled out, allowing the humans it was carrying to sit normal straddle upon its back once more. Looking around, Ash saw that they had finally re-emerged into the surface world once again, and as he took in the new surroundings, the black-haired boy saw the open ocean spreading out for miles on all sides. The sky was just starting to turn a faint reddish-orange as evening set in, and faint white clouds dotted the expanse of space in one-of-a-kind patterns all throughout the visible heavens. Looking down, Ash also saw what he knew to be the entirety of the second seafoam island laying directly below them, far below. He could, from his vantage point in the sky, see that they had emerged through a well-hidden cave hole. One which was situated directly in the center of two halves of the rocky island that folded in on each other and almost hid the whole from view. The hidden passage was on the furthermost south side of the island, but given that there was no way by land to walk around the island to reach that area, the only other way was by sea. Although, because of how turbulent the waters around the island were and how difficult it was to even reach it in the first place, he figured that no one would ever sail to the south side anyway. Especially since there was no land to make berth at, along with the fact that the actual rock of the island looked slick and near impossible to climb. All, in Ash's mind, it was a perfect place to have a hidden second entrance that went almost directly to Articuno's nest. Taking several deep breaths of the fresh, outside air that now abounded around them, Ash looked back at his friends and saw them now staring in wonder out over the sea. Especially Misty, whose eyes were glued to the sight of the slowly setting sun casting the calm ocean waters to flaming rivulets of fire. As if sensing their amazement, Articuno took off, and now that it was no longer confined by the tight spaces of a cave, its wings could freely extend without concern, and the open sky happily greeted the magnificent bird's gentle and rhythmic wing beats. Soaring across the sky above the open ocean, Articuno's bright blue feathers was illuminated by the setting sun, and the distinctive, long streaming feathers that trailed behind it seemed to cast sparkles of snowy light in its wake. On it flew, treating Ash and his friends to the amazing spectacle of seeing the world and the ocean below from the vantage point that only a natural and winged master of the air could give them. The four young trainers had traded in any sense of fear at flying bareback on a legendary Pokémon and allowed it, instead, to be replaced by expressions of wonder, amazement and awe at everything they were seeing. Pikachu and V both emerged fully from Ash's backpack and climbed around until they were both able to sit comfortably upon his lap and watch the visually amazing spectacle firsthand. Looking down, Ash smiled and wrapped his arms around them. "Pretty cool, huh, guys?" Pikachu and V both looked up at him and gave twin replies that were matched in enthusiasm. Pika. VV. Laughing, Ash looked forward again just as Articuno veered downward and took them closer to the water. "Hey, look at that." Misty pointed down towards the ocean and her voice was excited. "I see a school of Seeking and Goldeen." They all looked as well, and, sure enough, there swimming beneath the waves was a large school of the aforementioned water types of both evolutionary lines. At that, Articuno got even closer until they were soon flying fast and level above the waves. As they went, the legendary bird of ice allowed its wings to lightly graze the water in between flaps while the kids straddled upon it looked down in amazement at the ocean passing rapidly beneath them. V became a little too curious when he poked his head over Ash's arm and ended up getting lightly sprayed in the face, which caused him to pull his head back in and rapidly shake it in annoyance. This, of course, only caused both Ash and Pikachu to laugh. Finally, Articuno started to climb into the air again, and it kept going until, soon, it was so high up that they could see across the ocean on all sides. "Look, guys." Brock pointed. "I think that's the main seafoam island over in the distance." They each looked in his direction, and indeed, where the spiky-haired gym leader was pointing, they saw the unmistakable site of the island city of the main seafoam island. From where they were, they could literally see everything. From the harbor where the ships were docked, to the large oceanside homes at the wealthy end of the island, and even the central hub itself where the bulk of the city lay. They could also see the beaches on all sides of the large island, including the isolated southern end that they had set out from before. Since nighttime was approaching, all the lights in the city of Seafoam were also just beginning to turn on and bathe the island in man-made illumination. "I think I can see the mainland from here too, and the sea bridge." Giselle pointed beyond the main seafoam island, and there, indeed, was the mainland in the far distance. Along with the bridge that connected the island to Fuchsia City's sea highway and coast. "But what's that bridge then?" Misty asked as she gestured to another bridge that was on the far western side of the island, in a direction they had not before been. The bridge in question was far longer than the one on the northern side of the island that connected Fuchsia's mainland to Seafoam. The bridge seemed to stretch out from the island and then far across the ocean, down to a very distant end of the coast. All the way into the west, practically, until visibility became unclear. Oh, that's the sea bridge that connects Seafoam to the western half of Kanto, Ash answered as he stared in the same direction. You know about it, Ash? Misty asked as she turned her head to look at her friend. Yeah, he affirmed with a nod. The sea bridge we used is shorter and connects Seafoam to the eastern block of Kanto by Fuchsia City. The Oceanside Highway isn't long and the bridge itself in distance is about the same. As Articuno hovered gracefully in the air and allowed them to look around, Ash kept explaining. Back home, Pallet Town has its own harbor where cruise ships and other boats come into port. There's also a sea highway that takes you way into the east, all the way around the coast until you come to a sea bridge. He pointed. That big one there, the one you see now. It goes way across the ocean and extends out past where Vermilion Bay meets the sea. Eventually, the bridge meets up with Seafoam Island. He pointed to where the bridge in question finally met up with the island itself. Right there. He then shrugged. Me and Mom never came here before by that way, but I know about it. It's pretty cool. Seeing as how the young man had finished giving his small geographical explanation of the area around his homeland, Articuno turned itself to the left and flew downward again. This time, the Kanto legendary of ice made a sharp veering to the south and decided to give the trainers on its back a longer flight through the sky, though it remained at mostly the same level of height. As he and his friends flew peacefully and calmly through the open sky that was slowly turning to evening, seeing the vast blue depths of the ocean below stretching out before them and the smell of the salt air rising up to meet them, Ash leaned down and spoke to the legendary ferrying him. Hey Articuno, I have a question. His voice was of a need to be louder over the rush of the wind, but since Articuno had been telepathically speaking to them, it was able to respond in the same decibel of voice. Yes, young one. The stories surrounding legendary Pokémon usually always put them originally in the regions that they came from. I've heard you, Zapdos and Moltres referred to as the legendary birds of Kanto, but is that true? Some people say that Kanto has no legendary Pokémon myths. As it flew out beyond the second of the Seafoam Islands, Articuno spared a small glance back and replied to the boy's inquiry. You must understand what the human definition of a legendary is, young chosen one. In the terms of many humans, a legendary Pokémon and a mythical Pokémon are one and the same. But in true origin, this is not so. Articuno then took a wide, curving, leftward arc that saw them climbing into the air again. Legendary Pokémon are Pokémon of great power and strength, usually of only one or no more than a few in number throughout the world. They are Pokémon whose power and the feats they can accomplish thereof have earned themselves legendary status among humans. Such as myself and my two siblings. Because of our own lore, we are called by your race the Mirage Trio. We have many different places that we may call home in the world, but myself and the other two prefer our nests here in Kanto and the Orange Islands. Rarely have we traveled abroad in many years. Reaching the level of the clouds again, the ice-type legendary continued. Mythical Pokémon are those of my kin that deal with forces of nature and other such elemental properties. In those cases, their existences are interwoven with the realms of nature that they govern. These particular members of my family are so ancient and mighty in the minds of humans, even ancient ones, that their existence is merely speculated upon. They have been unseen for ages and thus, their legend has become myth. Giselle then spoke up loudly from behind Ash. If I may ask Articuno, I always heard that legendary Pokémon are genderless and therefore unable to breed. Yet, you sound female, why is that? Most of us are unable to breed, yes, myself included. Articuno informed. Though we each have our own distinct voices and personalities. We are genderless, as you say, though only by the perspective that we cannot bear young. That does not mean, however, that we do not hold certain characteristics that are specific to the male or female sex. Giselle nodded in understanding but felt not the need to say anything in reply. After all, what could she really say to such a thing in the first place? For the rest of the time after that, the four of them simply sat back and enjoyed the peaceable and pleasant ride that the legendary Pokémon was kind enough to treat them to. On they rode, into the setting sun and a little beyond. Articuno took them up into the clouds several times and allowed them to experience, firsthand, the cool and misty sensation that only passing through full, white puffy clouds could give someone. At times they would fly for a while up amongst the vast ocean of fluffy sky cotton, though some of the clouds were a slight shade of gray with the accumulation of rain that had yet to fall. Amazingly too, from up at their height, it seemed as though the setting sun was casting the forest of clouds into colors of orange and red that were a true spectacle to the eyes. At points, Articuno would also take them down into the open sky where they were able to see the ocean in all of its vastness stretching on into eternity. The sun as well was casting its fiery shadow upon the surface of the waves and caused them to give off a bedazzling glow. Like liquid fire that made peace with the water itself to create such a wondrous sight. Sadly, all things must come to an end, mostly that is, and thus was true for their memorable time upon Articuno's back. Therefore, with the sun still just barely hanging on in the sky, the majestic bird started to fly them to the shore, a distance that seemed great by sea but through air only took minutes. On Ash's instruction, Articuno flew them to the southernmost end of the main, commercial seafoam island and, soon, she, as the four of them had silently decided to begin thinking of the feminine-sounding legendary, flew gracefully down to the same deserted beach where first they had set out from. As the beautiful and glorious bird of ice finally touched down upon the soft sand of the beach, close to the gently lapping evening waves, Articuno lowered herself to the ground and allowed her passengers to disembark. Once their feet were on solid ground again, Ash stepped back and smiled up at her as she raised herself to her full height again. "I really want to say thank you, Articuno," he began earnestly. "For everything. Getting us out of the cave and for taking us on that ride, it was the most amazing thing I've ever experienced." His friends echoed his gratitude in their own words, even Pikachu and V in their own unique Pokelanguage from atop Ash's shoulders. This, in turn, caused Articuno to coo fondly at them and blink her eyes. "You are most welcome, young ones, it was my own pleasure. You did me a great service in standing up against those vile humans and for that, I shall be forever grateful." At that, Misty asked, "Will you go back and live there again? Knowing that Team Rocket has found where you live?" Articuno shook her head. "No, I shall not. It was my custom in former times to migrate from place to place and, as I said earlier, I have other places that I call my roost aside from that island. I shall venture to the nearest one tonight, under the cover of darkness." "Where will you go?" Giselle asked in a mix of curiosity and concern. Looking at the brunette, Articuno blinked again before replying in amusement. "Ah, young one, that I cannot reveal to you. Perhaps we shall meet again there when it is time and if your path leads you to it." At that, Ash stepped forward and closer to her. "Does that mean, we may or may not see each other again?" The mighty ice-type legendary looked down upon the boy that she was already forming a warm spot for. Quite in the contrary to her icy, literally, nature. "Dear one, you must understand." She paused for a moment before continuing in a wizened and vague manner. "In this world, some things are set in the stonework of time before they are even begun. Some paths are intertwined forever and others are merely mingled for a time before separating." She then looked amongst he and his friends collectively. "At present, you and your companions have a strong bond that cannot be broken, this I can see. However, even your current shared paths may be joined for only a time. Indeed, it may be many seasons and for several moons in the future yet untold." She blinked her red eyes once, sagely. "Though you must remember, life and the ways we wander have a mystical way of going in directions we never foresee. Some here among you may stay forever bound upon this shared path that you now tread and it is possible that, for a few, it may even permanently join. Though it is also possible that your paths may diverge as life's unique design beckons each of you away onto your individual adventures." She then leaned down and got close to Ash's face, the right of her great red eyes looking into his amber ones intently. "But remember this. From the time before you were born, our paths were already intertwined, dear one. Just as those of the Pokémon you call your friends and companions were much the same." Ash looked at Pikachu and V and shared a smile with them before looking back at her as she continued. "The shared path you travel with the friends you have with you now may someday diverge indeed, even though your bonds remain strong. But as for you and I, our own destinies were intertwined from the very beginning. As you will find with others in the future perhaps. Her voice took on a warmer tone to it as she continued to stare at him without so much as blinking. I feel certain that we will someday meet again. At that, she rose up again and pulled her face away. Though I believe that you have much to do and see and accomplish before that time comes. She raised her wings out once and then folded them again. You have but only begun on your path, young one, and there is much that awaits you in this vast world. You will grow, you will experience many things, and you will mature with time and with trials. Never lose the pure heart that beats within you, never lose sight of who you are, and maintain the strong bonds that you form with people and Pokémon alike. For those ties will allow you to succeed and grow strong and successful in all that you do, more so than anything else. Articuno nodded her own head slowly. But I guarantee that when we next meet, you will be a different person than you are even now. And who knows what the future has in store for that meeting. Ash nodded to her words, letting all of them sink in, before looking to the ground in thought. Then, after several long moments, he looked up again and asked. Will I meet any more of you? You know. Legendaries, I mean. She was silent for a time herself, not so much as blinking or even moving, before at last speaking. And even then, her words were mysterious and shrouded in secret. To this, I cannot say, for I do not have the gift of foresight to see into the future. And even if I did, I would not feel so inclined as to tell you. However, I can say that with a destiny as vast and rich as yours, young one, there is no telling what you will experience and see in days to come. This, unfortunately, is all that I can tell you. Though hoping for a little more, Ash really couldn't say he was surprised at the reply. Regardless, he smiled and was just about to reply when, a thought hitting him, he held his hands out and exclaimed, "Wait a minute. I just remembered something." He then looked up at Articuno and clasped his hands together pleadingly. I know this may be too much to ask, and if so, I totally understand, but would you please allow me to scan you with my Pokédex? He then held his arms out to the side and explained. As you know, I'm a Pokémon trainer. When I left my hometown after getting Pikachu and becoming an official trainer, the Pokémon professor of this region that helped prepare and teach me for my journey, Professor Oak, gave me a Pokédex. Reaching to his side where his Pokédex was always clipped onto the cloth belt of his track pants, Ash withdrew the small, black and red device and held it up for the legendary to see. This basically allows me to scan and catalog all the Pokémon I meet on my journey for information, both for Professor Oak and for the Pokémon research world in general. Since all individual Pokémon are different, even ones from the same species, scanning them allows us to learn more about Pokémon and even unlock certain mysteries surrounding them. He gestured at himself. I don't wanna just be a Pokémon trainer. Someday, I would love to follow in Professor Oak's footsteps and be a Pokémon researcher myself. That's why I always scan every new Pokémon I meet if I have the chance and if I'm not in the middle of a battle. His face became pleading again. I know you may not want to, and again, that's fine if you don't, but I would really appreciate it if you did let me scan you. If not for me, then for Professor Oak. He's like a grandfather to me, and without him, I wouldn't be half the person I am now. I love him like family, and I know this would really make him happy and help his research out big time if you allowed me to scan you. As if in amusement, the large bird seemed to trill in reply, like she was laughing. Be my guest, young one, I do not mind in the least. With that, and with an excited group of friends behind him, Ash beamed at Articuno and then shared a big smile with Pikachu and V. Afterwards, he gave several thank yous to the easygoing legendary before opening his Pokédex and pointing the video camera and sensor at her. As he did this, the small green light on the right-hand corner of the Pokédex switched on and began blinking as the powerful little device came online. Soon, the intelligent, robotic voice of the highly knowledgeable and semi-sentient cyber organism, known simply as Dexter, sounded from the handheld device in a crisp and sophisticatedly educated tone. At the same time, the camera and sensors locked in on Articuno and, with Dexter's first words, a picture of the legendary, appearing exactly as she stood now, materialized onto the small screen of the Pokédex. Ash's friends gathered round to listen. Pokédex entry number 144. This Pokémon appears to be none other than the legendary ice-type bird of Kanto, Articuno. While often having been described as a mythical legend associated only with the Kanto region, this Pokémon is claimed to have been spotted around the world. It is one of 3 other legendary bird Pokémon, the others being Zapdos and Moltres. Both of these birds are supposed to be of the electric and fire-type natures, but this is scientifically unverified. Together, with Articuno, they are known as the Mirage Trio. Ash and the others found themselves suddenly wishing that Dexter was less robotic and more lifelike, since the current groundbreaking moment was somewhat strange coming from a soulless machine that could feel no emotions. Nonetheless, the mini supercomputer went on without stalling a word. Since this Pokémon has never been scanned before, not much is known about it. The new incoming information from this scan shows that this Pokémon is indeed Articuno after processing all known artistic renditions of it in the database. External scan shows that this Pokémon is of the ice and flying type natures, as was speculated but now confirmed. Physical details has been saved to database via photo imagery, and specific height and weight measurement information will now be available after the scan. There was a sound like a computer or printer scanning something that emitted from the Pokédex before. Finally, Dexter's voice spoke again while Articuno remained still in place. This Pokémon is exactly 6 foot 7 inches tall and has a weight of 122 pounds. Internal scan shows. Once more there was a pause as Dexter seemed to process all the new information that one scan had revealed about the legendary ice type. At last, he spoke again. This Pokémon appears to possess an extremely cold internal and external temperature. Articuno is now confirmed to be a genderless Pokémon and possesses the ability Snow Cloak. It also seems to know the moves: Gust, Ice Shard, Screech, Mist, Mirror Coat, Ice Beam, Agility, Reflect, Roost, Blizzard and Sky Attack. No other detailed information is available to be provided at this time. Well, I imagine you already got enough to make several of Professor Oak's days. Brock commented astutely after Dexter finished speaking. He and the 2 girls were still staring over Ash's shoulder at the Pokédex. No kidding, I bet he'll be over the moon to hear about this, Ash. Giselle agreed enthusiastically. Misty lightly thumped his shoulder. Yeah, you actually got to meet and then scan Articuno of all Pokémon. Not many people could claim that, especially trainers as early into their career as you. Lucky. Ash could only look down at the image of Articuno that was still on the screen of the Pokédex and nod in agreement. That very picture, as well as the information collected about the legendary that would be used in future research and scientific study by Professor Oak, and who knew how many potential others, had the young man feeling some small manner of pride in knowing that he was responsible for it. It was at that time Articuno finally spoke again. Well, young ones, the time has come and I must now depart before the night has truly fallen. It will take time to reach my other roost that is nearest here, and I would rather fly under cover of darkness when few eyes are looking skyward. With that, Ash put his Pokédex away and slowly walked up to her again. Well, I really hope to see you again, Articuno. Meeting you was like a dream come true for me. Me too, Misty said with a smile as she stepped up to Ash's one side and Giselle on his other. And me. It was wonderful meeting you, Articuno. Brock bowed his head respectfully. I never would have thought an ordinary gym leader from Pewter City would ever get the honor of meeting a legendary Pokémon, and I'm even more grateful you flew us here. Thank you, Articuno. The icy-natured bird gave a fond look to the 4 of them and bowed her mighty head a bit herself. It was my own pleasure meeting 4 such special and stutharted young humans as yourselves. I hope to see you all again as well. She looked at Ash specifically as she said that, though for only a quick and brief moment. Pikachu and Bee both took her attention, however, as they each chirped words of parting up to her in their own manners of doing so. Pikachu Pi. Bee. VV. Looking at the 2 smaller Pokémon, Articuno nodded in acknowledgement of them. Indeed. I can sense you are both special and very fine Pokémon yourselves. Make sure to look after young Ash here and take care of one another always. They both nodded in the affirmative, especially Pikachu, whom raised a small fist to her and nodded with a serious gleam in his eyes. Pikachu. Articuno took a second longer to just stare at the yellow electric type, her keen red eyes gazing intently at him. Almost as if she were studying him, sizing him up and seeing something about the young Pokémon that she didn't put into words. Regardless, she eventually looked away and then unfurled her great wings. After that, Articuno slowly began ascending up into the air with mighty thrusts of her powerful wings. Powerful, yes, though no less graceful by any means. Even the sand itself was hardly stirred by her taking off. Finally, as the legendary bird of ice began climbing into the sky above their heads, she called down to the 4 young trainers with the last bit of the telekinetic link that remained between them. Farewell, young ones, take care of yourselves and mind the steps you take on the road before you. And so, with that spoken, she turned and flew higher and higher into the air until, in seemingly no time at all, Articuno was fading into the darkening sky beyond. However, as they all stood there simply staring after her for a good long while, each of them heard her give a long, musical and beautiful trill. Arrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr feathers faded into sparking bursts of diamonds against the moonlit sky. When the majestic legendary was finally out of sight, Giselle sighed and smiled serenely. This was one amazing day. Misty nodded in agreement. One I won't soon forget, that's for sure. Brock, turning then, looked back toward the small swath of island jungle that separated them from the populated city of Seafoam. The very way in whence they had come when beginning their journey to the second of the islands, earlier that day. Well guys, I guess we should head back now. It's getting dark and it might take a little longer to traverse that overgrown path through the jungle that leads back to the city. I think I saw a Pokémon Center there earlier today, so we should be able to get a room or two for the night if it isn't too busy. Misty turned to follow him while putting her hands behind her head. Oh, a room and a soft bed sounds great after everything that happened today. And maybe a nice, warm shower too and a bite to eat. Getting these warm winter clothes off will be nice too, since I'm already getting hot being back on this beach. Giselle, for her part, stopped for a moment and looked back at Ash. Are you coming? She asked of her boyfriend. He simply looked back at her for a moment over his shoulder and nodded. Yeah, catch you guys up in a second. After she turned back away and followed Brock and Misty up the beach, Ash looked at the place in the sky where Articuno had flown off to. Somewhere out there, far over the ocean toward the south. Then, with an idle hand, he reached into his right pants pocket, deep as it was for the winter trousers he was wearing, and pulled out, gently, what he had been carrying within them. As he pulled it out and held it up toward the moon above between his thumb and index fingers, Ash gazed for a time at the feather he had found back in Articuno's nest. The feather was as light blue as that which adorned the legendary itself, and it seemed to still hold the same shiny, beautiful sheen to its surface as when it had been attached to her. What was more, the feather was cool to the touch and soft as could be under his fingertips. Much as it had been when his own hands had rested upon Articuno's back while she flew them all out of the caverns and through the sky. As he stared at the feather under the light of the emerging moon with Pikachu and be doing the same, Ash smiled softly to himself and nodded. I take this as a promise, Articuno, that someday, we will meet again.